Young black man weds wealthy older woman for her fortune. What happens when she discovers his true motive? The Rosemont Country Club stood as a bastion of old money and even older prejudices in the heart of Atlanta. Its sprawling grounds and meticulously maintained golf courses were a far cry from the crumbling sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts of the South Side, where Darren Johnson had grown up. As the young black man adjusted his rented tuxedo in the mirror of his beat-up Civic, parked discreetly in the far corner of the lot, he couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment. How many lives could be changed with just a fraction of the wealth concentrated in that building? How many kids from his neighborhood could go to college, start businesses, or simply have enough to eat? Darren's chocolate brown eyes hardened with determination. He wasn't here to serve drinks or park cars. No, tonight was the beginning of his master plan, a scheme born of desperation and nurtured by years of watching his community suffer while the elite of Atlanta sipped champagne and discussed their stock portfolios. As he strode towards the entrance, Darren's mind wandered to the faces that had driven him to this point. He thought of his mother, her once beautiful face lined with exhaustion from working 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. He remembered Marcus, his brilliant best friend, who'd had to drop out of college when his scholarship fell through, crushed dreams evident in his eyes. And then there was little Tanya from down the street, just 6 years old and already facing a life-threatening illness her family couldn't afford to treat. These faces, and countless others from the South Side, steeled Darren's resolve. He pushed aside the voice in his head that whispered this was wrong, that he was betraying everything his mother had taught him about honesty and integrity. The ends, he told himself, would justify the means. The opulent ballroom hit Darren like a physical force as he entered. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. The clinking of champagne flutes and the gentle strains of a string quartet filled the air, along with the low murmur of Atlanta's elite as they discussed business deals and summer homes. Darren moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his eyes scanning the room for his target. He'd done his research meticulously, poring over society pages and charity gala photos. And then, like a beacon cutting through the fog, he saw her. Evelyn Whitaker stood alone near one of the ornate pillars, a flute of champagne held delicately in her manicured hand. At 65, she still cut an impressive figure, her silvery blonde hair expertly coiffed, and her porcelain skin remarkably smooth for her age. The diamond necklace adorning her throat could have funded the Southside Community Center for a year. Darren's heart raced as he approached, a dazzling smile plastered on his face. This was it, the moment that would set his plan in motion. He grabbed 2 fresh glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and made his way to Evelyn. "Excuse me," Darren said, his voice smooth as silk despite his nerves. "I couldn't help but notice you seem to be in need of a fresh drink." Evelyn turned, surprise flickering across her features as she took in the handsome young black man before her. For a moment, Darren feared she would dismiss him outright, call security even. But then something shifted in her pale blue eyes, interest perhaps, or simple curiosity. "How thoughtful," Evelyn replied, her voice rich and cultured. She accepted the proffered glass with a nod. "And you are?" "Darren Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm here representing the Southside Community Center. We received a last-minute invitation." Evelyn's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "The Southside? That's not an area I'm terribly familiar with, I'm afraid." Darren saw his opening and seized it. "It's a part of Atlanta that's often overlooked, Miss Whitaker," she supplied. "Evelyn Whitaker." "Miss Whitaker," Darren continued, leaning in slightly as if sharing a confidence. "The work we do at the center, it's changing lives, giving kids hope, options beyond the streets. But we're always fighting an uphill battle against lack of funding, lack of resources." He watched Evelyn's face carefully as he spoke, noting the flicker of interest in her eyes. She was listening, engaged. "Good. It sounds like admirable work," Evelyn said, taking a sip of her champagne. "Though I must admit, I'm surprised to see someone from such an organization at an event like this." Darren chuckled, the sound warm and disarming. "Believe me, I'm as surprised to be here as you are to see me. But when the invitation came, well, I couldn't pass up the chance to network, to try and drum up support for our cause. As they continued to chat, Darren skillfully steered the conversation, painting vivid pictures of the struggles faced by the Southside community while subtly flattering Evelyn. He watched as her initial wariness gave way to genuine interest, even admiration. What Darren didn't notice, however, were the disapproving glances being cast their way by other partygoers. The sight of a young black man in close conversation with one of Atlanta's wealthiest widows was causing quite a stir. Nor did he notice the tall, imposing figure watching their interaction from across the room. Richard Whitaker, Evelyn's son, observed the scene with narrowed eyes, his jaw clenched in barely suppressed anger. As the evening wore on, Darren felt a growing sense of triumph. Evelyn was charmed, engaged, already hinting at the possibility of touring the community center. It was all going according to plan. But as he looked into Evelyn's warm blue eyes, saw the genuine compassion there, Darren felt an unexpected twinge of guilt. He pushed it aside ruthlessly. There was too much at stake to let emotions get in the way now. Little did Darren know that this chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, about love, and about the true meaning of family. The seeds of deception had been sown, but from them would grow a story of redemption that would shake Atlanta society to its core. The weeks following the Rosemont Country Club Gala were a whirlwind of calculated moves and growing emotions for Darren Johnson. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, teetering between the mission to uplift his community and the overwhelming guilt gnawing at his conscience. He had started with a singular focus: secure Evelyn Whitaker's trust, her money, and ultimately her hand in marriage. Yet, each passing day saw that focus blur as feelings he hadn't anticipated began to take root. True to her word, Evelyn arrived at the Southside Community Center the following week. Darren stood on the steps of the center, his stomach in knots as her sleek silver Mercedes pulled up. The car was like an alien vessel on these streets, its pristine surface stark against the backdrop of narrow roads and aging buildings. Darren watched as children, their shoes scuffed from play and neglect, pressed their faces against the chain-link fence. Their excited whispers filled the air. For a moment, a pang of guilt gripped Darren's chest. This wasn't how he had envisioned changing the lives of kids like these. They deserved better, yes, but not like this, not from a deception wrapped in good intentions. Yet, the faces of his community members, like little Tanya, who smiled shyly at Evelyn despite her illness, reminded him of the stakes. He had to do this, for her. "Welcome to Southside, Miss Whitaker," Darren greeted, offering his hand. Evelyn, always composed, stepped out gracefully, her eyes wide as they scanned the surroundings. Her fingers brushed his, soft and delicate, a sharp contrast to his rough hands, another reminder of the world separating them. Evelyn's blue eyes lingered on the center's faded paint and cracked windows. "Oh my," she murmured, almost to herself. "I had no idea." Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, Darren felt a stab of uncertainty. But he quickly seized control of the situation, leading her inside, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the narrow halls. He led her through the center, showcasing the after-school programs, the worn-out staff members still pouring their hearts into the kids, and the job training classes that kept teenagers hopeful for a future beyond the streets. Every room, every story was a lifeline for his pitch, an emotional trigger to move Evelyn closer to his cause and closer to his ultimate goal. "The work you're doing here is truly remarkable," Evelyn remarked as they stood in one of the classrooms where teenagers learned skills for future employment. Her voice was filled with genuine admiration, but Darren couldn't enjoy the moment. He wasn't doing this for her approval. Yet, despite his internal conflict, the knot of guilt twisted tighter inside him. His pride in the center's work clashed with the shame he carried. Was he really saving his community by deceiving someone who wanted to help? As the weeks went by, Darren found himself spending more time with Evelyn. Initially, their meetings were brief, business-like discussions about the center, funding strategies, and the potential for larger projects. But slowly, these conversations shifted, becoming longer and more personal. Darren couldn't deny the shift in his own feelings. What had started as manipulation was transforming into something far more complicated. One evening, over dinner at her Buckhead mansion, Darren found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, at one of Evelyn's stories about her late husband's absurd social circle. He had meant to steer the conversation back to the center, to maintain his focus on the goal. But before he knew it, they were talking about life, about dreams, regrets, and what the future might hold. The mansion was expansive, every room adorned with luxury and echoes of a life Darren had never known. Yet, seated across from Evelyn, it was easy to forget about the grandeur and focus on the connection they were building. "You're not like anyone I've met, Darren," Evelyn said that night, her voice soft as they shared a quiet moment after dinner. You make me believe in something again." Darren's chest tightened. She didn't know. She couldn't know that every word, every smile was part of a plan. A plan he was starting to question with every glance into her trusting eyes. But not everyone saw Darren the way Evelyn did. Richard Whitaker, Evelyn's son, had grown increasingly suspicious of Darren's motives. What had begun as subtle, sidelong glances during dinners or fundraisers had morphed into thinly veiled hostility. Their first few interactions had been civil, but the tension between them was palpable. "You're playing her," Richard hissed one evening when they were alone in the mansion's drawing room. His pale blue eyes narrowed, brimming with barely contained fury. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" Darren stared back at him, fighting to keep his cool. "I'm not playing anyone," he said calmly, though his heart was pounding. "I care about your mother." Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the room. "Care about her?" he spat, stepping closer, his voice lowering into a menacing growl. "You care about what she can give you. The house, the money, the name. You think marrying her will get you everything." Darren swallowed hard, his fists clenching by his sides. Richard was dangerously close to the truth, and the sting of it left Darren feeling exposed. But he couldn't falter. He couldn't afford to let Richard see the cracks forming in his resolve. Before the tension could escalate, Evelyn entered the room, calling Darren back to the dinner table. The conversation ended there, but the weight of Richard's accusations stayed with Darren. That night, as he lay awake in his small apartment on the south side, Richard's words rang in his ears. Was Richard right? Was this all for personal gain? Or had his intentions, somewhere along the way, shifted into something more genuine? Darren wrestled with these thoughts in the dark, the silence of his apartment only amplifying his inner turmoil. As the days went on, Darren threw himself even more into his work at the community center. If he could drown out the guilt with action, maybe the weight of his lies would lessen. But no matter how hard he worked, how many smiles he brought to the faces of the children and their families, the deception loomed over him like a storm cloud. Each interaction with Evelyn brought him closer to her, but it also drove him further into the web of lies he had spun. He had convinced himself that it was all for the greater good, for the community, for kids like Tanya, whose medical bills continued to mount. But the guilt was relentless. He couldn't help but feel he was betraying not just Evelyn, but everything his mother had taught him about integrity. And then there was the ring. It sat on his coffee table, a small velvet box that symbolized the next step in his plan. Darren had scraped and saved for months to buy it, envisioning the day he would propose to Evelyn, securing not just her heart, but her fortune as well. But now, every time he looked at the ring, it felt like a ticking time bomb. It represented everything that was wrong with this charade, everything that weighed on his soul. One evening, after another exhausting day of working at the center and navigating the complicated emotions between him and Evelyn, Darren found himself staring at the ring once more. His hands trembled as he reached for it, the pressure building inside him like a vice squeezing his chest. He poured himself a drink, hoping to numb the rising panic. What am I doing? The question echoed through his mind over and over as he paced the small apartment. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, the air too thick to breathe. His mind raced, thoughts spiraling as he thought of the people depending on him. His mother, Marcus, Tanya. They needed him to see this through. They needed him to succeed, no matter the cost. But at what cost? Every time he looked into Evelyn's eyes, the plan seemed more and more fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter everything. Darren sank onto the couch, pressing his palms against his face. He had come so far. There was no turning back now. but the weight of the lies was becoming unbearable. The next morning, Darren stood outside the community center, watching as Evelyn's car pulled up once again. Her smile was warm, her presence calming, but Darren could feel the storm brewing inside him. How much longer could he keep this up? How much longer could he pretend? The summer sun beat down relentlessly on Evelyn Whitaker's Buckhead estate, turning the garden into a sweltering furnace. The wedding was meant to be a day of joy, but beneath the surface, tensions were boiling. As Evelyn walked down the aisle, the luxury of the setting clashed with the discomfort and conflict it represented. Darren Johnson stood at the altar, trying to maintain his composure. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, noting the subtle signs of disapproval from Evelyn's wealthy guests. The lavish surroundings seemed to highlight the divide between his world and theirs. The opulence of the estate contrasted sharply with his own modest background, making him feel more like an outsider than ever. Evelyn's entrance was nothing short of spectacular. Her gown, a creation of delicate lace and silk, shimmered under the sunlight. Darren couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as he watched her approach, knowing that his presence here was based on a deception he struggled to justify. The small gold band around his neck, his only link to his true self, felt heavier than ever. The officiant's voice, smooth and practiced, filled the air. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Evelyn and Darren." As Evelyn and Darren exchanged vows, Darren's mind wandered to the conversations he had overheard earlier. The murmurs of Evelyn's guests had been filled with thinly veiled criticism and outright disdain. One guest had muttered about the extravagance of the affair, while another had expressed disbelief that Evelyn had chosen someone like Darren. Darren squeezed Evelyn's hands, trying to push the intrusive thoughts away. He repeated his vows, his voice steady despite the internal turmoil. "I promise to stand by you, to cherish and support you through all the days of our lives." Evelyn's response was filled with warmth. "I vow to love you unconditionally, to be your partner in all things, and to build a future together." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the crowd erupted in applause, but Darren could sense the tension beneath the surface. The divide between the two worlds was stark and unyielding. Evelyn's family and friends clapped with forced enthusiasm, while Darren's acquaintances, though respectful, looked distinctly out of place. The reception was a study in contrasts. The ballroom, adorned with crystal chandeliers and gold accents, was bustling with elegantly dressed guests. Darren's friends from the South Side tried to blend in, their unease palpable. They sampled the extravagant dishes and sipped champagne, though they clearly felt out of their element. Darren and Evelyn made their way through the crowd, smiling and exchanging pleasantries. Every handshake and congratulatory remark felt like an additional weight on Darren's shoulders. He was constantly aware of the eyes on him, the whispers about his origins and his true identity. The guilt gnawed at him, each interaction serving as a reminder of the deception he had perpetrated. As the evening wore on, Darren excused himself from the crowd. He stepped out onto the terrace, seeking a moment of solitude. The cool evening breeze was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. He leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights, his thoughts swirling with anxiety and regret. His moment of solitude was abruptly interrupted by Richard Whitaker's voice. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it?" Darren turned sharply, his heart racing. Richard stood behind him, his expression a mix of contempt and curiosity. "Richard," Darren said, forcing a calm tone, "I didn't expect to see you here." Richard's smile was cold and unfeeling. "You didn't expect to see me? I'm family, after all." Or at least that's what everyone's led to believe. Darren tensed, sensing the hostility in Richard's tone. "Is there something you need to say?" Richard's gaze was piercing. "Oh, I think you know exactly why I'm here. I've done my homework, Darren. You're not who you claim to be. I've heard all about your little ruse, your attempts to infiltrate our world." Darren's heart pounded. He had known this confrontation was inevitable, but he wasn't prepared for it to come so soon. "I'm here because I love Evelyn. I didn't come to cause trouble." Richard's eyes narrowed. Love? Or is it something else? Maybe you're after the Whitaker name, the money, or the influence. I've seen people like you before. You'll do whatever it takes to climb the social ladder. Before Darren could respond, Evelyn's voice called out from inside. "Darren, where are you?" It's time for our first dance. Richard's expression hardened, his anger barely contained. You're playing a dangerous game, Darren. I won't let you destroy what my family has built. Be careful, or you'll find out just how far I'm willing to go to protect it. With that, Richard turned and walked away, leaving Darren standing alone on the terrace. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Darren felt a surge of determination mixed with fear. He had to protect Evelyn and their future, no matter the cost. As Darren made his way back inside, the music for their first dance began to play. He took Evelyn's hand, guiding her to the center of the dance floor. The spotlight was on them, but Darren felt like he was walking through a storm. As they danced, Darren's mind raced with thoughts of Richard's threats. He was acutely aware of the eyes upon them, the scrutiny from Evelyn's family, and the disapproval from his own. The dance was meant to be a moment of joy, but for Darren, it felt like an intense, almost excruciating trial. Evelyn leaned in, her voice a soft whisper against his ear. "Are you okay? You seem distant." Darren forced a smile, his heart aching. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Evelyn looked concerned, but didn't press further. Instead, she rested her head on his shoulder, and Darren closed his eyes, trying to find solace in her presence. The evening continued, filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. But for Darren, the joy was overshadowed by the looming threat. The night felt like a ticking clock, with each passing moment bringing him closer to an inevitable confrontation. As the reception wound down, Darren and Evelyn retreated to their private suite. Evelyn's excitement was palpable as she chatted about the day's events, but Darren struggled to stay focused. His mind kept drifting back to Richard's warning and the growing realization that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't fully anticipate. Evelyn's hand rested on his arm, her touch warm and comforting. "I'm so happy we're finally married," she said, her eyes shining with love. Darren looked at her, his heart heavy with a mix of love and dread. "Me too. More than you know." As they prepared for bed, Darren's thoughts were consumed by the uncertainty of the future. Richard's threats had been a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. He knew that the path he had chosen was fraught with danger, but he was determined to face it for Evelyn's sake. The night was quiet, but Darren's mind was anything but. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, grappling with the weight of his decisions. The journey ahead promised to be filled with trials and tribulations, but Darren was resolved to confront them head-on. His love for Evelyn was his guiding light, and he hoped it would be enough to see them through the storm that was fast approaching. The weeks following Darren and Evelyn's wedding were a precarious dance on the edge of a knife. To the outside world, they appeared the picture of newlywed bliss. The dashing young community leader and his elegant, wealthy bride united in their passion for philanthropy. But beneath the currents of tension and unspoken truths threatened to pull them under. Darren threw himself into his work at the Southside Community Center with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Each smile from a child whose life was being changed, each tearful thank you from a parent who finally had hope for their family's future, was both a balm to his guilty conscience and a twist of the knife in his gut. He organized new programs, expanded outreach, and fought tirelessly for every penny of funding. Yet, despite his successes, the weight of his deception loomed over him like a dark cloud, dampening every victory. Evelyn, for her part, found herself navigating a minefield of social obligations and thinly veiled racism. Her former friends, the ladies who lunch of Buckhead society, alternated between saccharine concern, "Oh, Evelyn dear, are you safe with him?" and cutting remarks, "I suppose the help is moving up in the world these days." She struggled with her own conflicted feelings, torn between her loyalty to Darren and the judgmental whispers of her old social circle. Evelyn's once elegant gatherings had become battlegrounds where she fought to defend her love and her choices against the disapproval of those who had once been her closest allies. Richard Whittaker, meanwhile, bided his time, a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The file from his private investigator grew thicker by the day, each new revelation stoking the fires of his righteous anger. He followed Darren's every move, documenting discrepancies and gathering more damning evidence. The growing pile of evidence was not just a means to an end, but a manifestation of Richard's pain and insecurities, a way to assert control over a situation that felt increasingly out of his grasp. The reckoning came on a balmy Atlanta evening, as Darren and Evelyn hosted a gala fundraiser for the Southside Community Center at their Buckhead mansion. The event was a bold attempt to bridge two worlds, bringing together the wealthy elite of Atlanta with the community leaders and residents of the South Side. The mansion was adorned with lavish decorations, a testament to Evelyn's flair for opulence. The guest list was a who's who of Atlanta society, mingling with the hopeful faces of Southside residents who had come to support their cause. As champagne flowed and checkbooks opened, Darren felt a growing sense of triumph. This was what he had dreamed of: real change, real opportunity for his community. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps the ends had justified the means. The guests were engaged, enthusiastic about the cause, and the evening seemed to be a success. Darren saw this as a validation of his efforts, a sign that the sacrifices he had made were worth it. But then Richard appeared at his elbow, a malicious glint in his eye. "It's time for a family meeting," he hissed, gesturing toward Evelyn, who was deep in conversation with a potential donor. Now. The trio retreated to Charles Whitaker's old study, the tension between them nearly visible in the air. The room, steeped in the history of the Whitaker family, was filled with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and heavy, dark wood furniture. Evelyn's brow furrowed with concern as she took in Richard's triumphant expression and Darren's obvious discomfort. "What's this about, Richard?" Evelyn asked, her voice taut with apprehension. She looked between her son and her husband, trying to gauge the gravity of the situation. Richard's smile was cold as he tossed a thick file onto the antique desk. "It's time for the truth to come out, Mother. Your beloved husband here isn't who he claims to be." Darren's heart pounded in his chest as Evelyn reached for the file with trembling hands. This was it, the moment he had dreaded since the day he'd first approached her at the Rosemont Country Club. He opened his mouth to confess, to beg forgiveness, but the words died on his lips as Evelyn gasped, her face draining of color. "Charles?" she whispered, staring at a photograph paperclipped to the top page. "But how?" Richard's victorious expression faltered. "What? No, Mother. Look at the rest. Darren's been lying to you. He's a con man, a gold digger." But Evelyn wasn't listening. Her wide eyes turned to Darren, filled not with betrayal, but with a dawning understanding. "You're Charles's son," she breathed, "aren't you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Darren, his legs suddenly weak, sank into a nearby chair. "Yes," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I swear, I didn't know until after we were married. I never meant—" "Liar!" Richard exploded, his face contorted with rage. "You expect us to believe this convenient story? You've been planning this from the start, haven't you? To worm your way into our family, steal our fortune." "Enough!" Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip, silencing both men. Her pale face was flushed, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Richard, sit down. Darren, explain everything. Now." And so, in that room, heavy with the weight of decades of secrets, Darren poured out the truth. He spoke of his mother, a maid in the Whitaker household who had caught Charles's eye. He recounted the affair that had resulted in his birth and the payoff that had sent them away. He told of growing up knowing he had a wealthy white father who wanted nothing to do with him, of the anger and resentment that had fueled his initial intentions. "I came here angry," Darren admitted, his voice thick with emotion, determined to take what I felt I was owed, to use it to help my community. But then, he looked at Evelyn, his eyes pleading. "Then I fell in love, real love, and suddenly, the plan didn't matter anymore. Only you did." Evelyn's eyes were wide, glistening with a mix of shock and sorrow. "Darren, why didn't you just tell me the truth from the start?" Darren's laugh was bitter, his voice trembling. "Would you have believed me, the son of your late husband's maid, claiming to be his illegitimate child? It seemed too incredible, too scandalous." "Perhaps not," Evelyn conceded. She turned to Richard, her expression hardening. "But you, Richard, you knew. You've known for weeks, haven't you? And instead of coming to me, instead of trying to understand, you plotted and schemed." Richard's face drained of color. "Mother, I was trying to protect you, to protect our family name." "Family?" Evelyn's laugh was harsh, a sound of deep hurt. What do you know of family, Richard? You, who have judged and condemned without ever trying to understand? She stood, moving to Darren's side and taking his hand. Darren is your brother, my stepson, and he has done more to honor your father's legacy in the short time I've known him than you have in years. The shock on Richard's face was palpable, his worldview crumbling around him. The weight of his prejudices and assumptions seemed to collapse in on him. But he's black? Evelyn finished, her voice sharp. Yes, he is. He's also kind, passionate, and dedicated to making this world a better place. Qualities your father valued highly, if you'd care to remember. Evelyn turned back to Darren, her expression softening despite the tears streaming down her face. I won't pretend I'm not hurt by the deception, Darren, but I understand it. And I believe in the love we've found. She squeezed his hand, her voice steadying. Now, shall we go back out there and show Atlanta what a true united family can accomplish? Darren stood, overwhelmed by the forgiveness and love he saw in Evelyn's eyes. Yes, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Yes, let's do that. As they moved toward the door, Evelyn paused, looking back at Richard. Are you coming, son? There's room in this family for all of us if you're willing to open your heart. Richard stared at the outstretched hand of the brother he'd never known he had. In that moment, he saw not a threat to his inheritance or a stain on his family name, but a mirror of his pain, his longing for acceptance. His pride and anger wrestled with the desire to be part of something real, something meaningful. Slowly, hesitantly, he took Darren's hand. The touch was tentative but symbolic, a bridge built between fractured lives. As the unlikely trio rejoined the gala, a palpable shift could be felt in the air. Seeing the Whitaker family united, black and white, young and old, sent a powerful message to the assembled guests. The atmosphere was charged with a new energy, a sense of hope and possibility. Checkbooks opened wider, and promises of support flowed more freely. The sight of Darren and Evelyn standing together, their love and commitment clear, inspired a wave of generosity and solidarity. In the days and weeks that followed, the Whitaker family became a symbol of hope and reconciliation in a city long divided by race and class. The expanded Southside Community Center, now backed by the full force of the Whitaker fortune and influence, began to effect real, lasting change. New programs were introduced, outreach was broadened, and the center became a beacon of hope and unity in the community. And though the scars of the past would never fully heal, the journey of truth, forgiveness, and love had created something profoundly transformative. In the end, it was not just about overcoming the obstacles that had been set in their path, but about forging a path forward together, bound by a shared vision of a better future. As Darren and Evelyn stand united, their story becomes a powerful testament to the strength of love and the possibility of redemption. It's a reminder that even in the face of deception and prejudice, true love and understanding can bridge the deepest divides. What do you think about Darren's journey from deception to redemption? Do you believe in the genuine love that has transformed his life? Or do you think the road ahead will be even more challenging? We'd love to hear your thoughts on whether Darren's actions and Evelyn's forgiveness can truly heal the wounds of the past. Share your opinions in the comments below. We're eager to know how you feel about this dramatic turn of events and what you believe the future holds for this newly united family. If you found this story as compelling as we did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and challenge our perspectives. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on our latest content, and join the conversation with fellow viewers who are passionate about stories of transformation and hope. Your engagement helps us bring more impactful content to you. Thank you for sticking around till the end of today's video. We appreciate your support and look forward to sharing more incredible stories with you soon.